Hello, my name is Deb Fewster. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Victorian Council of Social Service, VCOSS, and I'm coming to you today from the VCOSS office, which is located on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people. I'd like to pay respects to elders past and present, and it's great to be with you, bringing you the latest in our series of RentersRights rundown events. In today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on minimum standards, and we're going to do a particular deep dive on minimum standards that relate to thermal comfort and energy efficiency. And we've picked this topic because it is very much front and centre in people's minds at the moment, both renters, policymakers, community advocates, because we are in a cost of living crisis, we're in an energy crisis, and we know that the quality of Australia's housing stock is quite poor when it comes to energy performance, and it has a material impact on both people's kind of wallets, and it also has an impact on people's physical and mental health as well. It's very topical because the Victorian Government is currently looking at introducing a new suite of minimum standards that relate to energy efficiency. So we're going to be talking a bit about that today, but where we really wanted to start with our Renters' Rights rundown event is also looking at what current rights exist for renters in relation to energy efficiency and thermal comfort. So we've got a great agenda with this webinar for you today. We're going to be covering quite a bit of ground. What we're going to do is cover three things. Firstly, we are going to explain to our audience, our community sector frontline workers, what provisions are currently in place under the Residential Tenancies Act. Secondly, we're going to talk about what the Victorian Government is actually proposing in terms of new minimum standards, and also how you can have your say on those as well. It's really important that you all have a voice in that. And thirdly, we're going to talk about why having minimum standards on energy efficiency matters. So we're going to have a short presentation on new VCOSS research on the link between the energy performance of housing and health. So to kick us off today, I'm really pleased to introduce Rory Anderson. He is our Energy Policy Advisor here at VCOSS, and he's going to be talking about what the current minimum standards are and what that means. Over to you, Rory.
Thank you, Deb. Rental minimum standards mandate the minimum features that a property must have before it can be leased to a tenant. They cover a wide range of features like locks, electrical safety, structural soundness, lighting, and many other essential characteristics of a property. Under the Residential Tenancies Act, landlords are responsible for making sure that properties meet minimum standards, while Consumer Affairs Victoria is the government agency responsible for enforcing the standards. Historically, Victorian homes were not constructed with any requirement for thermal performance, as it was believed that low energy costs would mean homes could be easily heated or cooled as required. Unfortunately, this short-sightedness means that many homes today have very poor thermal performance. This began to change in 1998 when energy efficiency standards were included in construction regulations. And in 2021, the Victorian rental minimum standards were updated, and with that round of reform, a heating requirement was introduced as the first minimum standard for energy efficiency in Victorian rentals. The standard requires that there must be an energy efficient fixed heating unit in the main living area of a rental property. The heating standard was a great first step towards more comfortable and energy efficient rental homes, but there are still big pieces of the puzzle missing. There are currently no standards for cooling, draft sealing, or ceiling insulation. And while there is a standard for hot water supply, there is no standard that requires energy efficiency in the heating unit itself. On top of that, the existing heating standard still allows for gas heaters and solid fuel burning heaters like wood or coal stoves, all of which are actually quite energy inefficient and can be dangerous to health. As well as gaps in the standards themselves, there is also the issue of non-compliance. While landlords are responsible for making sure that properties meet minimum standards, it is largely up to tenants to know the standards, identify if there is anything that's non-compliant, and then request a solution. Tenants often don't receive adequate information about minimum standards or the condition of a property prior to applying for or signing a lease. Also, in the context of the power imbalance between a tenant and their landlord and a very expensive rental market, many tenants are currently too concerned about their security of tenure to ask for the modifications that would be required for their home to meet minimum standards. Consumer Affairs Victoria also doesn't have the resources to completely address non-compliance with minimum standards, although a task force is being set up by the Victorian Government to take action against poor conduct by landlords and real estate agents and offences affecting the safety, security and tenure of renters. Concerningly, we know from a recent study by the Consumer Policy Research Centre and Tenants Victoria, the Is It Livable report, that rentals leased at a more affordable rate are less likely to meet minimum standards than more expensive rentals. The Is It Livable report also found that at rental open inspections, many property managers had a poor knowledge of the features in the advertised property that are mandated by minimum standards. All of these factors mean that Victorian rentals still tend to have very poor energy performance. They're difficult to heat in winter, difficult to cool in summer, and they use a lot of energy. This has serious implications for renters' physical and mental health, their financial security, and the greenhouse gas emissions impact of the residential sector. Back to you, Deb.
So that's the current state of play. Thank you for stepping us through that, Rory. We're now going to talk about what the Victorian Government is proposing next in terms of the new frontier for renters' rights and energy efficiency. It's my pleasure to welcome Julianne Tice.
Thanks so much, Deb. So I'll take us through what these proposed standards actually mean for renters, and then I'll take us through what the actual proposed standards are. So I think if I talk about what they mean first, then it'll make a bit more sense when I go into the actual detail, and then I'll talk about what's the process for getting these regulations actually put in place. So if these standards are enacted as is, there might be a little bit of change happening after the consultation process, but hopefully they won't change too much. These standards would mean that all rental homes in Victoria will become much healthier, more comfortable and safer for the renters who live in them. And these reasons, the reasons it will become much safer, healthier and more comfortable for people is that we will have now insulation will be required to be put in roofs of rental homes. And that will make sure that all homes are not so uncomfortable in winter and summer. So that will mean if sufficient insulation is put in place in these homes, that they're able to better retain warmth in winter when you're trying to heat your home, and it'll retain the cool temperatures in summer when you're trying to cool and it's hot outside. The standards for a draft ceiling will work along with the insulation, and it will mean that you're not feeling huge gusts of outdoor air coming into your home through cracks in the windows, window frames, or gaps in the floorboards. So those will have to all be sealed up, and coupled with the insulation, it will just mean that your home is much better able to retain the comfortable temperatures indoors, and you're not feeling the actual physical air from outdoors or just the temperatures from outdoors on really hot or really cool days. And it also means we'll have standards for heating and cooling, and again, I'll go into the details on all of these in just a minute. If implemented as proposed for heating and cooling, those standards will mean that renters can affordably heat and cool their homes. And the combination of these three things, the insulation, the draft ceiling, and the heating and cooling, will mean that it will be much, much more affordable for renters to heat and cool their homes. So not only are we making the house much more able to keep in the warm air that you're heating during the winter and the cool air that you're cooling down during the summer, because you have the insulation and draft ceiling in place, but we're also going to be required to put in efficient heating and cooling systems into rental units once these regulations are in place. And this is really important and exciting for renters because we're going to be required to put in reverse cycle air conditioners into rental housing if these standards go ahead as proposed. And I think a lot of renters don't realize that a reverse cycle air conditioner is actually really efficient and affordable to use, especially when you have sufficient insulation and draft ceiling in place. So if you're not constantly losing the conditioned indoor air that's in your home to outdoors because you don't have enough insulation and the house isn't draft sealed enough, if you are in a good situation where you're able to keep that conditioned air in, then it becomes suddenly a lot more affordable to heat and cool your home, even if you don't have efficient appliances. But the good thing is that we'll be required to put efficient heating and cooling in place as well. And the really interesting thing about reverse cycle air conditioners, at least I think it's interesting, is that they are called heat pumps. They work on heat pump technology, which means that for heating, we're actually pulling heat out of the outdoor air to bring it inside to heat the home. And in summer, it's actually pulling the heat out of the air and putting it outside. And so that makes it really efficient, and it means not much electricity is being used. And so it's a lot more affordable to use than, say, a plug-in electric heater or a gas heater even. So it's really good news for renters that we'll be able to use efficient heating and cooling along with the insulation and draft ceiling. But the standards don't stop there. There's more. There's also a proposed standard for water heating, which will mean that water heating costs go down, because the water heating requirements will mean that much more efficient appliances need to be put in place. And there will also be standards for shower heads, meaning they are a bit lower flow without making your showers less enjoyable. And there's also going to be a standard for blind cord safety anchors, meaning that the cords that you use for your window coverings will have to be anchored to the window frame, so that's less hazardous for children who might be playing around the windows. I will say that these standards are minimum standards, so they might not solve every single issue that a renter faces in terms of the health and comfort of their home, but they should drastically reduce the heating and cooling bills for a lot of homes, especially for those really poor quality homes that currently have no insulation, have gaps and cracks all throughout the house, and have really old inefficient appliances. So this is really good news for people who rent their homes. And most importantly, these standards mean that renters won't have to ask their landlords for changes to be put in place. So landlords will have to comply with these standards, and you won't have to ask for any changes to make things more healthy and comfortable for your home.
So why is all this important? Well, let's take a step back. We know that living in conditions that are too hot or too cold has a really significant effect on our health, both our physical and mental health, and also our financial health as well. VCOSS is doing a significant amount of research into this area, and as well as advocacy, and that work, we're very grateful, is funded by Energy Consumers Australia. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague to talk about this work. Over to you, Emma Halloran.
Thanks, Deb. Now, the Energy Health Nexus project being run here at VCOSS has looked at some of the evidence around the health implications of living in conditions that are too hot or too cold. There is a mountain of evidence showing that energy hardship can lead to reduced well-being, mental health issues, and a number of physical health problems, including respiratory, cardiovascular, heat stroke, and even obesity. Here in Victoria, we have a temperate climate, so we're at risk from both extremes during the winter and summer months. So I want to look at a few examples of this now. So it's estimated that 4.8% of the population of Australia suffer from the respiratory condition COPD. A Chinese study in 2017 looked at how indoor temperature could impact people suffering from the condition and found strong evidence to show that low temperature caused an exacerbation of symptoms, including breathlessness and flare-ups. So these health implications were also found in humidity above 70%. Flare-ups of COPD often result in hospital admission, so this is a huge concern, especially considering the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare tells us that COPD is a leading cause of death in Australia, representing 4.1% of all deaths annually. So not only is this a huge public health issue, the average cost per hospital admission for a person with COPD can range from $8,000 to $17,000. So considering a modest home upgrade can cost as little as $3,000, it seems that this is an easy fix to make huge cost savings in healthcare, as well as keeping people safe and well in their homes. Another example, in 2022, Sawyer investigated the impacts of heating and insulation measures in 149 homes with a focus on arthritis and inflammation. Participants had a new boiler or heating system installed in their home, and Sawyer looked at the impacts that this had on their health. The results were clear, with interviewees describing a number of positive impacts on their health, including fewer chest infections, reduced pain, feeling less anxious and depressed, and generally happier and more relaxed. And it's not just adults who suffer, children are at risk too. An Irish study in 2021 by Mohan showed that children living in household energy poverty were significantly more likely to develop child respiratory illnesses such as wheezing or asthma. So this had a knock-on effect to their education, making them too unwell to attend school, and impacts their ability to participate in sports activities, hindering their fitness level and overall well-being. Studies have also been done locally here in Australia to show the impacts of energy hardship. An example in 2021, Parakesh looked at the data from the household income labour dynamics in Australia across 14 waves and found that poor access to energy increases the risk of obesity. Now, obesity, of course, comes with a long list of health risks, including heart disease and type 2 diabetes. As our climate warms, we run an increased risk of people in our communities getting sick as a result of energy hardship. In 2016, a study estimated that the number of excess deaths from heat waves could be reduced by 90% if all Victorian homes were upgraded to a minimum of a 5.4-star energy rating. So these are just a few examples of the mountain of research-based evidence out there showing the health implications of energy hardship. As part of the Nexus project, we're looking at how some of our international friends have addressed the health risks associated with energy poverty. New Zealand's Healthy Homes Initiative, designed and delivered by government ministers in partnership with the Energy Efficiency Conservation Authority, have been running a national program for over 10 years now. The program initially focused on households with children at risk of rheumatic fever, but were extended to low-income for now families with children aged 0 to 5 and pregnant people. Families were provided with an assessment of their homes, and then they carried out interventions such as insulation and heating upgrades. 130,000 for now families have been supported as part of this program, which has resulted in 20% decrease in hospitalisations and increased school attendance. So as well as ensuring the health and well-being of a nation and uninterrupted education for children, this has saved millions of dollars in healthcare costs for avoidable hospital admissions for the For Now participants alone. Ireland has run a similar program designed by government departments alongside Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. The program provided energy efficiency upgrades targeted to the homes of people living in energy poverty with a chronic respiratory condition, which, as explained earlier, are a high-risk group. So 1,300 homes were upgraded as part of this program, and it resulted in a significant reduction in GP visits, emergency and hospital presentations. The group also reported an increase in social inclusion and a sense of control over their indoor temperature. So what about here in Victoria? Well, the sad news is that we are behind when it comes to our health and energy initiatives. Victoria have had some retrofitting interventions, but they are always subject to temporary funding, which limits the amount of participants supported and, of course, the ongoing sustainability of the programme. Sustainability Victoria trialled some programs similar to the New Zealand Healthy Homes initiatives, where they supported 1,000 low-income homes which had a family member with a chronic disease. They focused on thermal comfort and energy efficiency. 500 of those homes were upgraded prior to the winter months and 500 after this. They had a 3K budget per home, which wasn't huge, but the impacts were significant. The 500 homes that were upgraded prior to the winter months experienced an increase in quality of life and had significantly better mental health. Their healthcare costs were much lower than the groups whose homes were upgraded after the winter months. They used less MBS claims, had less hospital admissions and ED visits. Extrapolated data showed a savings of $900 in healthcare costs per year. So for every dollar spent, they saved $10 in healthcare costs. So it goes without saying that Victoria needs more scaled up and sustainable programs similar to the New Zealand Healthy Homes Initiative. This is vital to keep our communities safe and well.
Victoria really has led the way with a really ambitious reform agenda around renters' rights. We know that we can't rest on our laurels. We know that the energy performance of rental stock in Australia and in Victoria is pretty low. That's why this conversation, that's why this proposed reform agenda about the new frontier in minimum standards for energy efficiency is really, really important. We're really pleased that the government has launched this regulatory impact statement process. It's important that the community sector has a really strong voice. VCOSS will have a strong voice in that, but we really encourage you to be involved. To talk a bit more about that, it's my pleasure to introduce VCOSS CEO, Juanita Pope.
Thanks, Deb. And thanks to Rory, Julianne and Emma for those presentations. I'll keep this quick. As Deb has intimated, VCOSS, as the state peak, will be making a submission to the government on these new minimum standards and supporting their introduction. But every big shift in rental reforms over the past decade has been the result of sustained and coordinated community-wide advocacy. And this process is no different. We need you to make your voice heard. To help you do this, and to make sure that government is getting the best advice it can and to get this reform right, we've prepared a guide to help you develop your own submission. I encourage you to go to the VCOSS website and have a look. The guide steps you through a possible structure for your submission and outlines the elements that you may wish to include that speak to your context and your experience that will be compelling in this space. And as for VCOSS, we will continue to make representations to ministers and others and to engage with policymakers to help drive and shape reform in this space. Thanks, Deb.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for continuing to be actively involved in our work around renters' rights. We're really pleased to bring you this series of events, our Renters' Rights Rundown series. It's done through the support of the Victorian Department of Government Services, through the Victorian Property Fund. We're very appreciative of that support. We've got lots of resources around renters' rights on the VCOSS website, so please hop on, take a look around. You can view past webinars. There's lots of other resources on there. Just head to vcoss.org.au/renters rights. Thank you.